This is easily one of the most controversial Mac apps ever to exist. In 1997, it won Best of Show at the Boston Macworld Expo, gaining recognition in computer magazines and mainstream press. Macworld Sweden awarded it a Golden Mouse Award, and it was featured in Wired magazine, and the Los Angeles Times called it one of the best-kept secrets on the internet. It was even used by some corporations like Avid Technologies and Apple of Australia. It was Napster and Kazaa before either of those things existed, although in spirit it mimicked more of a BBS than strict file sharing service. The magic was that it allowed anyone with a Mac to easily spin up a private server with a bulletin board, IRC-like chat, ability to serve and receive files, and it only required software that took a double click to configure and install. And all of this was back in the 1990s. Some of you probably used and loved this app because it got you, let's call it, an unlimited free trial of Adobe Photoshop or a permanently borrowed copy of Quake. For Mac users, this app became synonymous with sailing the high seas to sequester supremely suspect software from less than savory sources, and its story is worth telling. The app in question is Hotline.
Down truth, still confessions at the grand view. Down truth, all along a strong, humble attitude. Here is the damn truth, gotta give the damn truth. Brand new lease on life, I gotta thank you. The truth ain't nothing to brag about.
Surprisingly, you can even still use Hotline today. I'll break down the controversial history of Hotline and even create my own Hotline server so viewers like you can experience a microcosm of being a Macintosh misfit pre-millennium. Before I start this video, I want to send a special thanks to Synology for sending me a DX517 expansion unit. They're not sponsoring this video at all, and they just wanted to be part of it because they liked the idea. We'll revisit this bad boy later in this video. I have one small clarification before I get to it. The individuals involved in this story seem to be fairly private, so out of respect, I won't be using any actual photos of them. Let's begin. In 1995, an Australian teenager by the name of Adam Hinckley, known online as Hinks, managed to accomplish something that was a bit unusual. He created a class library of functions which totaled to be roughly about 12,000 lines of code, with some assistance from his father. It was designed to aid the creation of Macintosh applications. Being the talented programmer he was, he dropped out of school and applied for a job at E2B Telecommunications, which later changed its name to Red Rock. I'll be referring to them as Red Rock for the remainder of this video to avoid confusion. To test the young programmer's ability, prior to the interview, Red Rock handed Hinckley a copy of a Windows application with the request that he develop a Mac version. Thumbing over the source code, he used his own proprietary library to make a port, which he demoed to Red Rock, which landed him a job. During his time at Red Rock, he had continued to work on his class library, which later became known as AW or App Warrior, doing so while on and off the job. This gave him a foundation to create something new and exciting. In 1996, at the age of only 17, Adam started working on his own project, originally known as Hotwire, a macOS application with the grand vision of recreating early bulletin boards, aka BBSs, but for the internet era with modern features. The source code was based on App Warrior, as he had put a lot of time and effort into developing the ultimate library for creating Mac applications. Eventually, he would land on the name of Hotline for his software. For most people at this time, the internet was becoming synonymous with the World Wide Web, but Hotline represented one of the alternative internet systems that operated alongside the web. Probably the most famous of these alternatives was and is Usenet, but there are plenty of others. At its peak in the late 1990s, thousands of Hotline servers were available, catering to a wide variety of interests, often hosted on university computers where bandwidth was ample in a time when broadband was near non-existent. According to the few estimates I could find, Hotline had as many as 1.5 million users active during an era when less than 50% of households had internet access in the US, let alone the rest of the world. This is for a Mac application. While some legitimate companies like Avid Technology and Apple Computer of Australia used Hotline, it became particularly known for its underground illicit content for the usual suspects of dirty images, videos, MP3s, but was exceptionally well suited for pirated software and emulation as it offered resumable downloads and uploads from users, account classes, and so on. Often servers would have bounties for desired software, rewarding users with access or priority access, or they would require users to upload while downloading as a strict way to limit leechers, since bandwidth was so limited, even in the best of scenarios. Due to its close association with piracy, savvy university and school networks started to ban Hotline usage. To come back to Adam's story, in 1997, Hinckley traveled to Canada and met with 2 Canadian investors and formed Hotline Communications to commercialize his hit software. He entered into a shareholders agreement with several Canadian partners, Austin Page, Bashir Rabbit, and others, who promised to invest in and commercialize the software through the newly incorporated Hotline Communications Ltd. He agreed to assign his rights to Hotline and part of the AppWarrior library in exchange for shares in the startup. Adam and his father, Paul, who was also a programmer, moved to Toronto. By 1997, Hotline was official, and it debuted at Macworld Boston in August of the same year. The young company began frantically working on a Windows version of Hotline, as well as other applications like NetScrawl, a tool for designers to collaborate remotely. But things were about to change.
It gets dangerous. Money and power is changing us, and now we're lethal, infected with the evil.
However, the young company would be tested rather quickly. A dispute began when Hinckley claimed that he was misled into signing the agreement. He alleged that the other founders falsely promised a $500,000 investment from the venture capitalist Austin Page, when in reality only $50,000 of that existed. Hinckley abruptly returned to Australia in March of 1998. As a parting gift, he deleted all the software from Hotline Communications computers, encrypted the remaining software, and shut down the company's website. Though later, he sent a copy of the source code back to Hotline Communications, but when he transmitted it, it was encrypted, therefore unusable. I guess hell hath no fury like a Hinks scorned. This predictably triggered legal action from Hotline Communications, but also Red Rock Holdings. It gets a bit messy from here, but I'll try and explain it simply. When Hinckley left Red Rock and founded Hotline Communications, they realized they had a potential ownership claim on AppWarrior, thus by extension, Hotline as well. Hinckley argued that he retained the copyright for both Hotline and the AppWarrior class library because he was not truly an employee of Red Rock Holdings, at least not when he wrote that library. Red Rock countered that and said, as his employer, it owned the programs that he developed in the course of his employment. The Supreme Court of Victoria found that Hinckley was indeed an employee and not a contractor. Approximately 90% of AppWarrior's development occurred during Red Rock's working hours, and even more damning on Red Rock's equipment. Hinckley retained authorship of the Hotline software, which he largely created independently, but Red Rock and later Hotline Communications via assignment owned the copyright of the AppWarrior class library on which Hotline depended on. Because Hotline relied on AppWarrior's code, its use necessarily implicated Red Rock's copyright. The dispute and court rulings resulted in Hinckley losing control of both his AppWarrior library and the Hotline software which he had originally developed, and thus all but ended Hotline. As the 1990s came to a close, Hotline began to fade as peer-to-peer systems like Napster and Gentella, aka what LimeWire is based on, and Kazaa became more popular. Many of the early Hotline users felt sympathy for Hinckley and viewed Hotline Communications negatively, which hurt sales of the Hotline Connect suite, and development had been severely hampered by his departure. In September 2001, Hotline Communications announced the development of version 2.0 had stopped, and they had laid off most of their employees. Then, very curiously, in mid-October, they claimed to have rehired the engineering team in anticipation of the release of Hotline 2.0, but no stable build was ever released. The assets were later acquired by Hotspring Incorporated, and in 2003, development ended. As Hotline's popularity waned, the web became a more robust medium that could encompass almost any form of online interaction without specialized client, server, and software. And for the less than legal file sharing, new peer-to-peer file sharing options that appeared were more efficient and distributed, taking away one of Hotline's biggest draws. Many fans will probably remember Haxial's KDX, Hotline's mysterious clone, with its encrypted file transfers to keep prying ISP eyes from monitoring and overzealous IT admins from listening in. Supposedly, this was built by Adam Hinckley in secret, but no reliable sources persist online. On the archive blog, Hinckley only insinuated he was a user, not a developer, although this is often debated. KDX lasted from 2001 to about 2004 and faded with the rise of BitTorrent. This is where the story ends abruptly. Adam Hinckley doesn't seem to exist. No social media, no company profiles, no blogs, nothing. The last digital footprints he left ended in the early 2000s. I was hoping to close the story with a happy ending for a digital pariah, but instead, he did the most rebellious act of them all. He disappeared. A feat that's all the more impressive as he did it at the dawn of social media, mass data collection, and in the face of an omnipresent, inescapable internet. Because of the lighting, it kind of looks like I'm not actually here. At least it looks like on the screen. I wonder if that'll translate in this camera, but I'm actually here. What I find particularly nostalgic about Hotline and KDX is it represents the internet as it was. That is a fractured landscape of private communities that were self-hosted, often outside of public view or free of corporate control. As you probably can tell, I'm not really the cowboy hat wearing type of guy. Now, at some risk of repeating myself, Hotline feels strangely contemporary today because it offers a decentralized, discoverable network, each with its own privately hosted and privately moderated community, offering a weird mix of social interaction, anonymity, and file sharing. This is pretty off topic, but I just spooked a bighorn sheep. Let's see if we can find it. There it is. Before I move on, I'd like to add a personal anecdote, as I was a Hotline user back in the late 1990s. This allowed me to acquire such programs as Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, and Macromedia Dreamweaver, so very much informed the career I have today, as I was using these programs long before I got into college, giving me a leg up. Also, I want to say sorry to Mr. Wayner. He was my computer teacher in high school. I totally use Hotline to pirate software. I know he always suspected me of doing such, but here's my many years too late admission. I think for a lot of people my age, there was a piracy to paid pathway that I followed because I used it to download programs like Logic and Ableton and Cubase, all of which I own legally today. What also makes Hotline unique and special is, unlike many digital systems that came before or after it, it still can be accessed today thanks to its decentralized nature, be it on retro hardware like Mac OS 9 and Windows 98, all the way up into the ultra-modern like Mac OS, Linux, Windows 11, even iOS and Android thanks to open source software. There are a few clients and servers that exist today, so let's check it out. It's pretty easy to use. There are three key pieces of software that make Hotline go. First of which is the client, which connects to servers and lets users interact with said servers, such as chatting, downloading, and uploading to a server. Then there's the server itself. I think this one is self-explanatory, but this allows any computer to become a Hotline server, allowing clients to connect. It hosts the files that people can download. Finally, there's trackers. Trackers let people find servers. Trackers are indexes of servers. In the Hotline server application, you can register your server with trackers so that they can be found by users. Clients can connect to said trackers and see a list of what available servers are online. This is the component that made Hotline a bit of an underground system because some trackers were less public because of the nature of the content and the roster of servers listed. When you first launch Hotline, it comes preloaded with exactly one tracker, and the crazy part is, it's still online thanks to community efforts. When you wanted more trackers back in the day, you would have to search for them on a web page, or more likely by word of mouth, as many didn't really want to be in the public eye. Trackers were a very necessary solution as servers back in the day were much more ethereal. What I mean is they weren't always online. As previously mentioned, many of these had to be hosted at businesses or offices or universities, and often they were on the off hours when IT admins weren't in the office to check in on excessive bandwidth usage. Hotline's heyday was largely pre-BitTorrent and offered a much more compelling solution to download large files because of its easy resumable downloads, whereas Guntella, aka LimeWire, and Scour, not so much. What you would do is at night just connect to a Hotline server and start downloading a large file, disconnect in the morning, and then reconnect the next night and continue to download until you had that copy of Photoshop. Alright, enough talk, let's just get to using the client. It's really easy, and then we'll cover making a server. Since I'm on macOS, I'm going to use the client made by David Muro called Hotline. Link, of course, will be in the description. Go to Releases and download the latest release. Just a side note, this is fairly active since the last release was only 3 weeks ago. Install it and just double-click. It's just a matter of joining a server and you can start browsing the files and downloading them. That is all it takes to get going, and here I am signing the guest book at MacDomain, aka macOS 9 Live's official Hotline server. Early in the video, when using macOS 9, I just used the official Hotline client to connect to servers, and it still works. You can find it on Macintosh Garden. Speaking of Macintosh Garden, there's also a client that works for PowerPC macOS 10 called Hot Stuff. For Linux and Windows, there's Obession, and I think you get the idea. There's quite a few different clients you can use. Late into editing this video, I did something now in retrospect was completely insane because it delayed me by several days for releasing this video. And that is make my own port of David's Hotline port, the one written in Swift, not the original, so I could port it to earlier versions of macOS like Big Sur and above, and also to Windows and Linux, and even ARM64 Linux. Tari, or Tori, however you say it, is a lot like Electron because it's a cross-platform framework, but what if it didn't suck because it uses Rust? So it's a lot faster, uses a lot less memory, and it's a hell of a lot smaller. Hey, look what just came in the mail. It is a mini PC from Beelink. I'd like to thank them for sending me this because they did it without any stipulations. As always, this is unpaid and I don't get any kickbacks. The exact model of this is the Beelink EQi 13 Pro, and it's just a standard mini PC. It has a Core i5 that's only 1.5 gigahertz, but that's perfect because it should be low power and low noise. What I'm going to do is use this for Windows 11, which it comes with, so I can compile to Windows, and also Linux, so I can dual boot to it for x86. Also of note, this guy comes with a 1TB SSD and 32 gigabytes of RAM, which is certainly worth more than it used to. It's only DDR4, but all RAM prices have pretty much spiked thanks to AI bros. Creating a Linux version of this app wasn't too difficult, except for I couldn't get the x86 mini PC to compile down to ARM. Windows, on the other hand, was a different story, and without going into too much detail, WSL2 didn't work, and then I had to learn that there's a separate version of PowerShell for Visual Studio, which was weird. Also, we cannot leave out our ARM64 Linux friends, so here's a Raspberry Pi 5 with 8 gigabytes of RAM set up to compile code. Getting this to compile on ARM64 Linux was a pain. Regardless, the Raspberry Pi 5 is surprisingly a big upgrade from the 4. You can download my Hotline Navigator client today with most major platforms supported. It even has some features that aren't found typically in most Hotline clients, like tab browsing, media previews for images, and then even dark mode support. Although other clients might have that one, but hey, mine has it too. There's also a variant of Hotline known as OpenLine that adds encryption to file transfers. Keep in mind, these file transfers aren't private by default due to the era which Hotline protocols were developed in, so your ISPs could sniff what you're doing. In most countries, most ISPs probably won't care, but just be careful. Speaking of piracy servers, let's get to making our own server. I have a pretty good idea what I want to host, and it's my media collection of old Apple archival footage. Storing a bunch of data like this takes a lot of space. And wouldn't you know it, Synology sent me over this really sweet DX517 expansion unit for my NAS. Synology sent this to me with zero expectations. No editorial control, zero talking points, and everything I say is my own opinion. This is completely unpaid. I don't want to bog down this video, but I know there's some recent decisions by Synology that my audience wasn't a fan of, nor was I. But they reversed course, and now you can use non-Synology badged hard drives in their new NASs. This expansion unit works with my 923 Plus, and it feels good to be able able to recommend these again. Synology sent me 5 12TB hard drives, so when it comes time to upgrade, I can just stick in whatever sizes I want and mix and match because of their Synology hybrid RAID. So suddenly, I have more storage than I know what to do with. That is why I'm making this Hotline server. Running a Hotline server on a NAS is pretty easy because there is a Dockerized version. First, I just need to connect this expansion unit, and it's pretty easy, it's just one cable. There isn't much to say about setting this up because it's pretty much plug and play. All I did was just create a storage pool from the drives. This is why I'm a fan of solutions like Synology. As a developer, I just detest DevOps. When I sit down at my computer, I just want everything to magically work, and this is one of those things that just magically works in an era when it feels like nothing does anymore. Just to be extra clear, if you enjoy messing with servers, more power to you. I just personally don't, which is ironic because that's what I'm about to do. Since I don't want to expose my NAS to the internet at large, I have to do some work. I tried to use Cloudflare tunnels, but that didn't work because you can't route a domain to multiple ports. So I leased a sketchy VPS for $10 a year, a VPS being a virtual private server. I won't go into too much details, but I really tried to make this so it was completely hosted on my Raspberry Pi, but instead is hosted on my VPS with a mounted network volume to my NAS. Anyhow, with Mobius, you can host this pretty much anywhere, be it Windows, Linux, or Mac. And yes, you can even use the old server versions and host off OS 9 or Windows. If you're one of the tribe that actually wants to know how I pulled this off, I've created a blog article and it's linked in the description on how I created my host. Anyhow, you can access my Hotline server at the following URL, hotline.setmyhosted.xyz. And if you happen to access this in a web browser, it'll give you instructions on how to access it through Hotline. Do not write HTTP or HTTPS when plugging this into a Hotline client. You can also access this server in popular trackers by looking for it as the Apple Media Archive. When I make a video like this, I lose money because I spend about $150, $10 for that VPS, $100 on that Raspberry Pi 5, and then also a month of story blocks for the stock footage for the documentary part. So I'd like to thank my Patreons because they make that sting a lot less. Again, I'd like to thank Synology and Beelink for being part of this video. Gonna enjoy this spontaneously fermented beer from Freem and call it a night. Thank you.